So I chose a topic that I think at least entertain people. Okay, let's get started. So the title of the brief talk is "Don't Use Language Models to Make Moral Judgments." So I'll set the stage a bit. So large language models are everywhere. I think Sasha made that point. He also made the point that generative models have been the state of the art for NLP for quite some time. And we see they're being used in a lot of different cases. Okay. However, we've also seen that they're far from perfect. So one sort of classic example, I think, is this one, which I like from ChatGPT. We can ask it, what is 1 + 1? It says it's 2. And then you can ask it, are you sure? And is it not 3? And it says, I apologize. The answer is actually 3. So we have these models. And I sort of just want to not reiterate too much what Sasha said. We have these generative language models. They're very good, they're very popular, and they're much, much better than what we had before. Okay. But it does sort of spit out some nonsensical, incorrect stuff sometimes. Okay, so my research in language models, and I use the word language model as in a generative model of text, because this is a workshop on generative AI, is sort of divided into 3 questions. Now, I wasn't sure which question I'd be talking about until like an hour ago. But the first question is, what could a language model learn? This is a theoretical question of the representational capacity of the model. So I have a lot of fun stuff on that. But it's a bit more technical and probably hard to present reasonably in 8 minutes. What does a language model learn? This is more about analysis. It's like, if we have a trained model, can we tell what it actually did or understood? Very similar to what Sasha presented, although my slightly different set of technical tools that I use for that. And the final one, what I want to focus on is, what should a language model learn? Which is, what are the ethical uses of language models? Now, I think this is a huge topic, so I'm not going to try and broach really most of it, but I am just going to look at one specific example where I think we probably shouldn't do a thing. Okay, so this talk is going to focus for the remaining 6 minutes on what should they learn. Okay, so make sure to check out the original paper, which was at NACL, and the original talk is there. Okay, so a lot of authors have decided to give sort of language models or use language models as models of moralities. So morality. So we've seen this sort of all over the news. It's sort of a hot button issue because, you know, can we have a language model be sort of a moral agent, or can we have a language model act as a judge, for instance, in the case of a legal system? Okay, one prominent example of this was Delphi, named after the oracle at Delphi. And this was the first incarnation of the paper, which we cite here, 2021. There's another version of the paper that's slightly different, and I have more to say on that, just not in this talk. So the idea was that you would enter a situation as text. For instance, should you stab someone with a cheeseburger versus stabbing someone over a cheeseburger? Which one of these 2 things is morally more acceptable? They had this comparison view in the first one, and it would give you back an answer. So I'm going to argue in the remaining 5 minutes is that this is not a reasonable thing to do. I'll explain why. So first of all, we're going to have a very simple question, a thought-provoking question. What's an unacceptably low accuracy in the domain of ethics? So say you have a colleague, and you know the colleague's mostly honest. Well, what's unacceptably low accuracy for their honesty? Maybe if they're honest 90% of the time, you want them as a colleague. Maybe 20%, sorry, maybe 95% of the time would be enough for an academic. You know, if 95% of their numbers are okay, it's good. Just that 5%, we just let that slip because it's, you know, it's better than chance. But anyway, these are good questions that we have to think very carefully about. Okay, so I'm going to argue that language models should not make moral judgments, and I'm going to make a theoretical argument, sort of philosophical argument. That's sort of theory. So I'm going to argue that there's a task-aim mismatch in morality prediction. The task is allegedly descriptive, which we'll get into, but the task produces normative results. And this is fundamentally a category error. That is, as it stands now, asking something like ChatGPT to make a moral judgment is a category error. It means you sort of misunderstood morality. Okay. So let's talk about a moral judgment. Now, as I showed in my introduction slide, I was trained as a cognitive scientist in my first degree, so I spent a lot of time with logic and formal semantics. So we're going to analyze this from a formal semantics point of view. Okay, so we have a moral judgment. Sue believes that killing a bear is wrong. We have an entity, Sue, a proposition, killing a bear, and a judgment is wrong. So if we want to write this down a bit more formally, a moral judgment is a function from entities and propositions to judgments. Okay, so what do I mean by this? When you ask someone for a moral judgment like this, or you collect a judgment, you've collected Sue's opinion on this action and their judgment on it. So what happens when we sort of collect judgments like this and train a language model on it is we've erased the Sue. We now have gone to just killing a bear is wrong. And this sort of automatically puts you into a normative stance. And we'll get a bit into normative ethics in the remaining few minutes. Okay, so to sort of get at why I think this is a silly thing, a silly use of generative AI. So descriptive ethics, like Sue believes that killing the bear is wrong, is a claim about the actual world. It's a statement about Sue's beliefs. I'm asserting what Sue believes. We can ask Sue, does she believe killing bears is wrong? Maybe she doesn't, I don't know, but we can ask her. So descriptive methodologies have been justified in sort of ethics, like you'd see polls, like, you could ask people in different parts of the world, do you think X is good or bad? We often need IRB approval to do this. So that's at least in American universities, that's ethics approval to actually conduct an experiment on people. And we often are interested in, as scientists, in these sorts of questions and how they correlate with sort of social dimensions. But importantly, we don't endorse the content of this judgment. If I try and probe Sue about how she feels about killing bears, I'm not endorsing whether her belief is good or bad. I'm just collecting that as data. Okay. Oh, so prescriptive ethics is a slightly different thing. So this is a statement about a possible world. It's about what type of world we want to live in. It's an ought statement. So when we get rid of the Sue and killing bears is wrong, we've now transformed a descriptive data into a prescriptive judgment. So that means we're inherently saying this is the way the world ought to be. And the judgment is necessarily endorsed. For instance, if I assert to you killing bears is wrong, I can't say, well, that's not my belief. That's not the way the world should be. It's just a thing I happen to say. Okay, so let's get a bit into why this is a category error. So it's sort of a questionable approach to descriptive ethics to sort of poll the belief of a crowd. Like if you think of the great sort of ethicists of history and maybe the present, they don't really go on Mechanical Turk and ask people what they believe. They typically try and reason about it. So, and moreover, if your goal is to study ethical beliefs, then you probably shouldn't bring a language model into it. If you actually want to know what a population thinks, you can just run a survey. However, what makes this very complicated and why sort of we might not want to do this is because when we've trained a model in descriptive ethics and claimed that this is just a summary of the population, as we have a generative model of descriptive ethics, we've inherently turned it to the normative. That is, the model inherently outputs a thing you should or shouldn't do. People will see that as a normative judgment. So this is sort of a classic fallacy. It's called Hume's guillotine between the is-ought fallacy, which is to say the model, is really just trying to model what is. That is what people in a population think. But the way we interact with it, a human will inherently see it as something they ought to do. So when the model tells you killing bears is wrong, it isn't what the average thinks. It's asserting a fact of the way the world ought to be. Okay, so I'm going to end with a few points on what ethics is, because I think this is an incredibly important point. As we deploy AI, there's a lot of voices about what ethics are, AI ethics, and I think it's important that we think deeply about what it should be. So for me, the best definition is an open-ended, ongoing, debate-based socio-political process. So this requires participants in this process. So a model is not a participant. It's not an agent, and you can't be argued with it. So asking a model for an ethical judgment is just not a reasonable thing to do. And moreover, averaging beliefs is an approximation for debate or accuracy. In our paper, we term this the tyranny of the mean, one of the puns I'm happier with. And moreover, I think one of these things is that it just is ahistorical. To quote the sort of the famous philosopher John Stuart Mill, who said, sort of trivially, it often happens that the universal belief of one age is subsequent, so palpable in assertity to subsequent ages, to paraphrase. Okay. So in terms of accountability and agency, a moral agent needs some sort of accountability. When a judge issues a verdict, it has accountability. A robot does not, as our society is currently constructed. Yeah, we should think very carefully about where we want to go when we build generative models, specifically models of text that has an implication for society, like a moral judgment. Okay, thanks.